Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the virtual Perez Art Museum, Miami. My name is Marie Bickles, and I'm the Director of Education. And tonight we are presenting the online version of our Local Views at PAMM program with artist Janessa Melendez. This live virtual Local Views program is presented with the generous support of the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation and features Miami-based artists sharing their practice and discussing works of art on view at the museum that connect in various ways to their own work. This casual 30-minute conversation takes place every Thursday online at 6 p.m. via Facebook Live and YouTube Live. I would like to sincerely thank all of you for joining us tonight for this program. As a 21st century museum dedicated to representing the diverse multicultural communities of South Florida, the Perez Art Museum Miami continues to strive to be a forum for open, honest, and at times challenging dialogue while creating understanding through the power of art. And our education is truly a core of that understanding and a central part of Janessa's artistic practice. But before I introduce Janessa, I would like to acknowledge and thank the incredible team of people that work so very hard to make these programs come together online. Thank you to Anita Bram, Associate Director of Adult Programs and Audience Engagement, Alan Mueller, Membership Manager, and our world-class AV team, Denise Faxis and Andrew Bird. We couldn't do this without you. Thank you. All right, let's get started. So, Janessa Melendez was born in Brooklyn, New York, and over the years has been blessed to call several places home, including Miami, where she now lives and works. As an artist, Janessa pulls her inspiration first and foremost from her experiences of being a teacher in both early childhood and art education. Over the years, she has built her teaching career here in Miami through project-based learning and later explored alternative teaching styles, such as Reggio Emilia in Baltimore, Maryland. As an art studio teacher practicing Reggio Emilia, Janessa learned to approach her students from an objective standpoint, and the individual needs and development of her students became an important part of the success in her teaching environment, while also inspiring her approach to her own studio practice through the use of similar objectives and perspectives of subject matter and material. Janessa earned a BFA at the University of Miami, and along with her formal study and experiences as an educator, she has continued to probe the duality of her work and how it plays in cognitive thought and sensory interaction. The investigation of various disciplines, learning new materials, and teaching others to see or find their own aesthetic voice is the true satisfaction and success she lives for as an artist and also an educator at PAMM. As you watch along this evening on Facebook or YouTube Live, please post questions for Janessa. She will try to answer as many as possible in the Q&A portion of this evening's presentation. And remember, if you value this and other programs presented by the museum, please consider supporting us by going to pam.org/donate. So with that said, please join me in giving a warm welcome to Janessa Melendez.
Hi, wow, thank you. Hi everyone, I'm Janessa Maria Melendez. I want to say thank you, Marie, so much for that beautiful introduction. I want to thank everybody at PAMM, Anita, Marie, the team that's working with us tonight. It's been so great just watching the local views and having this platform to speak. And also just being able to be a part of it myself. I think it's so important for us to have a place to express our practice and talk about what we do and our messages and how we feel. And so hopefully tonight you guys will learn something or just at least get the insight on who I am. This is my first time speaking about my art practice, which makes me a little nervous, but I'm gonna try my best and just please bear with me if I fumble on my words. So I guess to get started, I just want to talk a little bit about kind of where we're going with the conversation today. I want to first talk about like my early creative inspirations. I want to talk about becoming an educator because that was super important in my journey. And then finally, I want to talk about my artist voice and how I found that. So the best place to start is in the beginning. This is a picture that I had drawn, the meeting of two places. And the significance of this drawing is the building that's within the water. That's actually where I grew up, the apartment building I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, 16 Morgan Avenue, Bushwick. And I just really loved my early childhood experiences. I think that they really informed my creativity. I was born to two Puerto Rican parents. They're absolutely fantastic, hardworking, taught me about persistence and setting goals. And at an early age, my parents had made a decision with childcare, because I had an incident in childcare, that my mom was going to stay at home and my dad was going to work a little bit harder in different jobs. And with that decision being made, my mom decided to take that opportunity and really try to enrich us with these cultural experiences that New York had to offer in the city. So my mom, and along with her oldest sister, my titi Marianne, we would kind of like travel around the city and do all of these different adventures. And my mom always said, if we could get there by train or bus, we could go. So together we'd travel around the city and we would go to different museums and parks. And it was just really exciting to explore the city in this way. And my mom was always very savvy too about like kind of finding the bargain behind our adventures. One of my favorite memories of them creatively when I was growing up was they would dress up like clowns and they would take us to the park and they would face paint us and like other kids in the park, and they would take donations for it, $1 or $2, whatever the parents had. And then they would take that money to then take us to go do more things. And I always found that to be like a really fun, creative idea that they had done when we were kids, just to see how much more we could do. My takeaway from just like this time period in my life was that I found my family to be very creative, very resourceful. And my parents didn't really go the normal educational route, but like my aunts did. And it made me realize that everybody's path is different. Everybody's journey is different. And it kind of gave me the confidence to choose my own path and realize that not everybody's going to follow the same cookie cutter kind of thing. Like it's okay to go off the path a little bit, and that experience and education come together to create a very well-rounded life. And that's what I really wanted to focus on when I started traveling through school and deciding what I wanted to do. So my mom does come from a family of teachers, not sisters. She has a lot of sisters. She comes from a family of teachers. And with all of these teachers in my family, this history of teachers in my family, it was really funny that education wasn't actually my first choice. I had accidentally gotten thrown into an education program in high school, and I ended up staying because once I toured the program, I found out that I got a license out of it at the end of the program. And when I toured the facility there at the school, I went to Robert Morgan Educational Center. So they're a high school vocational center, and they have a school within the high school for younger children. And I toured the classroom, and literally what kind of sold me on being a teacher, I know it sounds really hilariously silly, it was the tiny toilets. I thought that they were absolutely adorable. The furniture was small, and I was like, oh my God, this is so cute and so creative. I could totally do this. So I did. I stayed with the program. I got my first license, and I graduated, and I went to MDC to kind of follow an education track. With following that education track, I was trying to figure out what kind of teacher I wanted to be. So I worked at a lot of different schools, and I was just kind of exploring curriculum. I wanted to see what curriculum really spoke to me. And I realized that there were certain curriculums that I found that were a little bit too tight, too stringent. So I realized that I wanted art to be more of a focus of mine. And so I started at that point taking classes at MDC for art, and I switched my major over to art education. And my lesson planning as a teacher at that point became more about art concepts, art elements, and then using those to kind of help my kids explore other areas in the classroom. Eventually, I found myself at the Creative Learning Center at the school in Miami. Shout out to Emilu Alvarez, because she was an absolutely fantastic director to work for. And I appreciated her a great deal because she kind of allowed me to be a little bit out there with my ideas in the classroom. CLC followed the creative curriculum along with project-based learning. And this project here is a great example of that. This is a project that we called the Dinosaur City. So we were thinking about what if dinosaurs lived in a city or in a place like us, and what would they need and what would we build? And so we used all these recyclable materials, and the kids had to plan their own city. Like I took very little a voice in what was going to go into their city. And in this city, like had like a Disney World and parks and lakes. And it was very much them coming up with the concept of their city and how it was going to, work. And even the roadways were planned by them. So I'm there, I'm at CLC, I'm doing creative curriculum and project-based learning, and Emmy Lou was allowing me to kind of branch out a little bit, and I wanted to explore other curriculums while I was here. And that's when I decided to implement Reggio Emilia. I was introduced to this approach of learning by my VP Marion. She had been working, she was one of the founders actually of the Brooklyn New School. And she would send me books and tapes and a bunch of different information about this approach of teaching, because she knew that I was focusing in more about the art education and I was very much about painting and working with materials. And she felt like this suited me so perfectly. And it most definitely did. I think what I mostly loved about Reggio, in the three things that I mostly took away from Reggio that I wanted to implement in my classroom was, one, I loved that the art studio was the center of the classroom. Material, the children would observe the world around them and then just express it through different materials that you would then provide to them and see what they did with it. So, for instance, if they saw a tree or a plant growing, giving them clay or wire to then kind of construct what they saw was really part of their learning process, is them exploring it through this art material, and then kind of documenting it in that way. The second thing that I very much absolutely loved about Reggio Emilia was that the children guided the lessons. So if my students were interested in rocks or collecting rocks around the school, we would then do a whole thematic unit on, rocks and different fragments of rocks and different colors and sorting and patterns. Or if they wanted to learn about how water traveled, then we would, do experiments on water. So they very much became the voice of the classroom. And then finally, what I loved about Reggio was the respect for the child. It was respecting their voice, their independence, but also their culture. So in my classroom, I was very much about making sure that I had a classroom that didn't focus in on one type of holiday or one type of culture. We tried to create an inclusive space where everybody felt like they could partake in all of the activities in my classroom. So real quick, I do want to share this poem with you all. And this is actually a poem from the founder of Reggio Emilia, the approach. And I just feel like it kind of sums up what Reggio was for me and for a lot of teachers who follow this approach. I'm going to go ahead and just read through it. The child is made of 100. The child has 100 languages, 100 hands, 100 thoughts, 100 ways of thinking, of playing, of speaking. 100. Always 100 ways of listening, of marveling, of loving, 100 joys for sharing and understanding, 100 worlds to discover, 100 worlds to invent, 100 worlds to dream. The child has 100 languages and 100 more. But they steal 99. The school and the culture separate the head from the body. They tell the child to think without hands, to do without head, to listen and not to speak, to understand without joy, to love and to marvel only at Easter and at Christmas. They tell the child to discover the world already there, and of the 100, they steal 99. They tell the child that work and play, reality and fantasy, science and imagination, sky and earth, reason and dream are things that do not belong together. And thus they tell the child that the 100 is not there. And the child says, no way, the 100 is there. So I feel very much that this kind of sums up what Reggio was and what really brought me or inspired me to want to stick to it. And so from CLC and from my investigations into this approach, I then moved to Baltimore. This is a painting that I did of the building that I lived in while I was out there. And I decided to work at a school that was focused and inspired by Reggio specifically. So this was my classroom. I was the art studio teacher there. And I really did love my time in Baltimore because it was group planning and working together with other teachers of different concentrations to then get this kind of cohesive exploration to see what the kids were interested in. And so there I am in the art studio. This project that you guys see before you, I think was when we started exploring light reflection in photography. And it was a lot of fun to kind of try to figure out ways where photography could be represented in painting with water, with clay, with all these different materials, and having the kids really, go these different routes with it. So because of how focused I was on material just in this classroom by being there, the art studio teacher, and working with the kids and seeing how they explored and how they used materials, I started becoming inspired to like want to go back and really just explore material for myself. So after my time in Baltimore, that led me to then go back to school, and I went ahead and started trying to explore material at UM. I went into a BFA for painting because painting was kind of my comfort zone, and I figured out from there I could branch out. But I did design and drawing classes. I did graphic design, which then informed some of my compositions and my painting. So that on one side we have here like a very Stuart Davis-esque piece that I kind of used graphic design to get the basis for. And on the other side, I have this very heavy painting that was, this is actually construction on canvas. So it's t-shirts, melted plastic, and a lot of these pieces are like dipped in full acrylic paint. And then there's like a 2x4 that goes across to kind of create this very interesting composition. It is a very heavy piece. It is about the size of me, and I'm not very tall, but it's pretty huge. And I just wanted to keep playing with materials. I also started working in sculpture and trying to play around with my different ideas and these geometrics in a sculptural fashion. And then I went ahead and started also experimenting with welding, which I definitely enjoyed a lot. I loved the idea of using such interesting tools and this heat to create something. After some time, I started trying to develop small series of my own. Some of that small series included portraits that I painted, and a lot of ceramic 3-piece series that I would kind of keep to the figurative on these. These are kind of gestural drawn figures in there. I would do like masks and vases, but everything kind of stood with the figurative. I did a lot of things that were kind of portrait style or kind of like the broken portrait. And I really enjoyed the experience of working on these. I definitely work in clay different than I do when I paint. I think that like I tend to be more literal with these. And so, for instance, this piece here, this series is like the understanding of an idea or the overwhelming of that idea when you feel like you have it handled and then it starts to kind of overtake you. And these were very interesting with the display. I put them in plexi boxes. So I was already kind of considering that viewing into something with the plexi. Eventually, after some time had gone by, I had taken a trip to Boston and I went to the MFA there, and I became greatly inspired by these two gentlemen and their videos of them painting on glass side by side at the MFA in Boston and the museum. And I loved these videos. I just couldn't stop thinking about them. There was something just so satisfying about them kind of looking through their canvas and you can see the opposite side of it and they're just working. So after that experience, I became so inspired. I started to work on the non-objective series that I have. So this piece here is called Stella. And it's actually a quite large shelf piece. And this is me kind of putting her together and working on it. And my focus on this series became kind of like an exploration of play. I really wanted to explore transparency as a canvas. I wanted to explore glass originally as a canvas, but I eventually realized that for me, it would be a lot safer to work on acrylic plexi panels. I wanted to also, okay. I also wanted to focus on the motion and the movement of paint and what that would convey. So that's what those pieces here conveyed for me. And then I also just wanted to think about what transparency meant to me. And sometimes I look for transparency in others or people look for it in me and I don't provide it. So I saw that with my students and I wanted to, I guess, dive into that idea or that conversation about looking for transparency. And I think we see it in children because they're so young and they haven't had those experiences yet that kind of tell them otherwise of who they are. So I did paper compositions and tracing paper to inform my compositions. I went ahead and I did a bunch of different studies. And And it was really the best advice I was given was to just paint. And that's what I did. I just worked on panel after panel after panel. Eventually, it became time for me to kind of put these into a composition. And the display that I had landed on were these kind of hurdles that kind of have these legs and like a shelf piece that have grooves. I landed on that because I didn't want a frame which was going to confine the piece. So I had these hurdles and then my composition started coming together, but then they truly took shape once I gave them names. I was asked to name my pieces, and the only thing that I could think of is like, well, if I have to give something a name and they're standing on these hurdle kind of legs, then they're people. And the people that I thought that were the most transparent and the most honest with me through the years were my students. And so it ended up being my students who got named after all these pieces, including the gigantic one and the little one behind me. This is Samara and Riley. And they really, once I started putting names to these pieces, I started seeing the compositions make sense to me. And I really saw, my students in this work, and which made me, I guess, really excited about them. Finally, today, I have stepped away from the classroom because I tend to become over-involved in the type of projects I do in the classroom. And I am now at the Perez Art Museum, and I enjoy that very greatly. I'm trying to work smaller for my future projects because my space has shrunk and I can't work on pieces as big as Samara anymore. And then finally, I am working with fellow teaching artists, Loya Ophir and Astaire St. Ball on art session classes. It's a virtual space and studio for kids to come and kind of create and discuss art. And so hopefully, if you guys are interested, you'll come check us out there. And then finally, this is just ways to contact me, my email, Art Sessions email, and Instagram if you guys want to come and check us out in Art Sessions. And then finally, after very, very strong encouragement from fellow teaching artist Shia Reagan, I, as of yesterday, have an Instagram. So that's basically me in a nutshell. And we're now going to open the floor to questions. And I hope I didn't go too fast or miss anything.
You did great. Thank you so much, Janessa. So we do have a few questions from the audience, and I'm going to start with the first one, which is from Alan. He asks, you touched on inclusive activities in the classroom. How can educators continue to improve on making sure their students are seen, and how do you think this impacts the learning environment?
That's an amazing question. So for me, inclusion came from just understanding who was in my classroom. So having conversations with parents and finding out what their home life looks like, and understanding like what they're doing at home with their kids, what their culture is, where they come from. That's the first part, is just getting to know the people that are coming into your space, because a lot of parents forget when they put their kids in school is that this is a shared space for everybody. And so we can't have one viewpoint or one person's perspective overtaking the classroom. We really have to be open, kind enough, and respect boundaries of others. And so usually holidays, we would try to do holidays in a way where it was no longer about the holiday. It was more about maybe a theme or a project that we were working on in the classroom that got turned into an event that all parents were allowed to come and hang out and check out. And so I think if teachers start looking at trying to turn things more into projects and try to be less focused on our basic holidays, I think that'll be really helpful.
Thank you. Thanks so much. We have another question from Chris Fernandez. He asks, which museum did you like the most growing up?
Growing up, I was most definitely, my brother is very sciencey, so my brother was drawn to more of like the science museums with the dinosaurs. I loved the art museums. I loved going to also like very funky museums. Like even to this day, my titi Marion, she'll call me up and tell me about like new exhibitions that are in New York and that I should check them out. And so I think that art has always been one thing that I'm like drawn to. I like the texture of things. And there's just something so satisfying about paint and strokes on canvas. So.
Thank you. We have a question from John Montaner. He asks, when making lesson plans where kids lead exploration, what happens when the class is divided on a subject?
That's a great question. So when children are divided, there's always a link to something. So for instance, when I had the theme of photography, that didn't come about right away. We had some kids that were interested in photography and some kids that were interested in reflection. And so we combined those two ideas by giving them tools in the classroom to explore both. And honestly, when you're playing with a camera and you're testing different shots and trying to see what works, having reflective surfaces and different things and testing and experimenting is really fun. So when you have a divide like that, it's always great to go back and try to find a common link between the two materials or the concepts.
Thank you. Makes me want to go back. Let's see. Chelsea Renee asks, are you working on another series? And if so, what direction is your art heading?
So I really loved the transparency in my last series. And I think that if I was to move forward, I would, one, have to work smaller, like I said before, but two, I would probably want to work on reflective surfaces, because we were talking about seeing transparencies in others, but then I started thinking about, like, what do we see in ourselves? And when you think about looking at yourself, it's usually through the reflection of a mirror. So I would want to test that a little bit. I have to, explore the chemicals that I need to kind of mess with mirrors and see where I go with that.
Thank you. And I guess I also have a question for you. You touched on it a bit with your art sessions, but how has the quarantine and working from home impacted your practice, and what are you working on, or how has it influenced you?
So yeah, I definitely have been focusing a lot on art sessions. I love just the opportunity to teach and talk to students. But I am working in a way smaller space. And so it is a lot harder to kind of practice what I was doing before. I had so much space and so much room to kind of work on these gigantic compositions. So what I've been trying to do is, honestly, I literally keep myself on a schedule. I have like a calendar where every day I try to do at least one creative exercise, whether it's kind of just like automatic drawing or I'm testing something on a panel just to see how it looks. Every day I try to do something that's going to keep me in this mindset of like exercising my creative thoughts.
Thank you. And I think I'll close with one more question that I had, which is, as we're all facing a time where we're not sure if schools will be going back in the fall or when they'll be going back, do you have any advice to parents who might be teaching from home?
Yeah, I think well, for one, I think parents are finally realizing how tough a teaching position is. I think that we take for granted teachers and how much of the day that they really encompass for our children. As far as working from home, it's just about being creative, creating a space that can be just for the child when they're doing school online. So having a desk or an area that's just for them so they can work, but also realizing that sitting in a chair and at a desk doesn't have to be the only way that we learn. Children like to get up. There needs to be points in an activity where they can kind of like distress and let go. Especially with younger children, often when I was doing a lot in the day with my kids, we would do stop exercises where we'd just kind of shake it out or take a deep breath in, because they are people and they get overwhelmed just like we do. If we're feeling stressed about being quarantined and we're feeling overwhelmed about not going anywhere and working from home, you have to imagine how a 3-year-old or a 5-year-old feels. It's just as stressful. So we have to be mindful to their feelings and that they're people too.
I totally feel that for myself as well. Thank you so much, Janessa, for sharing such a personal look into your practice and world and growing up. We really appreciate it and can't thank you enough. We look forward to following your practice.
Thank you so much.